Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the more black and dense it is. In Jung's model, the shadow is a precise psychological structure, the sum of everything the conscious mind has refused to own: traits, impulses, and desires that got labeled unacceptable and were pushed out of awareness rather than dealt with. It can hold cruelty and rage, but it just as easily holds ambition, creativity, and sensitivity. Shadow work is not about eliminating darkness from the personality. It is the process of becoming conscious of the traits, emotions, desires, and capacities that the ego has rejected. What remains unconscious does not disappear. It continues to influence our reactions, relationships, and decisions from beneath awareness. The purpose of shadow work is therefore not to become morally perfect. It is to become less divided, less reactive, and more responsible for what lives within us. The first step in shadow work is learning to recognize where the shadow appears. One of the clearest places it reveals itself is in our reactions to other people. We often assume that our reactions are caused entirely by the person in front of us. Yet there are moments when the intensity of our response far exceeds the event itself, suggesting that something deeper has been stirred within us. For example, a person's confidence may irritate us because we have learned to suppress our own. A person's success may awaken an ambition we abandoned. A compliment may make us uncomfortable because accepting it would challenge the image we have formed of ourselves. In these moments, the other person may not simply be the cause of the reaction. They are the catalyst that reveals something already present within us. This is what Jung referred to as projection. Projection causes us to experience unconscious aspects of ourselves as though they exist primarily in other people. For this reason, the people we admire most intensely and the people we condemn most fiercely often become mirrors through which the shadow becomes visible. Learning to recognize these moments is one of the first signs that unconscious material is entering awareness. Another way we can identify the shadow is through our own repeated and compulsive behavior. Whether it is alcohol, substances, work, social media, or something else, we often find ourselves returning to the same patterns, despite knowing they conflict with the person we consciously believe ourselves to be. At this stage, it is not necessary to explain these behaviors or understand why they occur. The task is simply to notice them. Judgment often drives unwanted thoughts and impulses further underground. Observation brings them into consciousness. Over time, patterns begin to emerge. We notice what repeatedly provokes us, what repeatedly captures our attention, what we habitually avoid, and which behaviors we return to again and again. These patterns remind us that the conscious self is only one part of the personality. Much of what we think, feel, and do is influenced by processes operating beyond conscious awareness. Shadow work therefore begins not with changing ourselves, but with seeing ourselves more clearly. Before the shadow can be understood or integrated, it must first be brought into consciousness. You cannot integrate what you refuse to see. Once the shadow has been observed, the next step is not to resist or dismiss it, but to listen. Our instinct is often to justify the reaction, suppress it, or distract ourselves from it. Yet in doing so, we silence the very part of the psyche we are trying to understand. The shadow does not become conscious because we argue with it. It becomes conscious because we are willing to hear what it has to say. This does not mean accepting every thought as true or acting on every impulse. Thoughts can be distorted, emotions can be misleading, and impulses can be destructive. The goal is not to obey the shadow, but to understand what it is trying to communicate. Every recurring emotion, persistent reaction, and compulsive pattern is attempting to draw our attention to something that has not yet been fully acknowledged. Anxiety may be pointing toward a fear we have avoided. Anger may reveal a boundary that has repeatedly been crossed. Jealousy may expose an unrealized potential or an unlived ambition. Even a compulsive behavior may be expressing a need that has never been consciously recognized. Rather than asking, "How do I get rid of this feeling?" begin by asking, "What is this feeling trying to show me?" That small shift changes our relationship with the unconscious. Instead of seeing uncomfortable emotions as problems to eliminate, we begin to approach them with curiosity. We stop asking how to silence the messenger and start asking why the message has appeared. This does not mean every message is true, but every message is worth understanding before it is judged. Only when we learn to listen can we begin to understand what the shadow is actually saying. Once we have learned to observe the shadow and listen to what it is trying to communicate, the next step is to understand where it came from. The patterns we experience rarely appear without cause. Every recurring fear, emotional reaction, insecurity, or compulsive behavior has a history. The question is no longer simply, "What am I experiencing?" but "Why has this become part of my personality?" Some aspects of the shadow are deeply personal. A fear of rejection may develop through painful relationships. Difficulty accepting praise may stem from growing up in an environment where confidence was discouraged. A tendency to avoid conflict may have been learned in a household where expressing emotion led to criticism or instability. Over time, we adapt to our environment. We learn which parts of ourselves are accepted and which are rejected. The qualities that threaten our relationships, our identity, or our sense of safety are often pushed outside conscious awareness. In this way, the shadow becomes shaped by our own life story. But not every aspect of the shadow is formed through personal experience. Some parts of it are inherited from the families, communities, and cultures in which we are raised. A boy may learn that showing emotion is weakness. A girl may learn that being assertive is unfeminine. Someone may grow up believing that ambition is selfish, vulnerability is failure, or forgiveness is naive. Over time, these beliefs become so deeply embedded that they no longer feel like ideas we have inherited. They feel like objective truths. We reject parts of ourselves, not because they are inherently wrong, but because we have been taught they are unacceptable. This is what we might think of as the collective shadow. Those aspects of human nature that families, cultures, and societies themselves struggle to acknowledge. But there is another source of the shadow that reaches even deeper. Not every aspect of the shadow is acquired through personal experience or social conditioning. Some elements belong to our shared human nature. Every person possesses the capacity for anger, lust, envy, pride, fear, and aggression. These instincts are not evidence that something has gone wrong. They are part of the psychological inheritance of being human. The danger is not that these impulses exist. The danger is pretending that they do not. What remains unconscious does not disappear. It simply finds another way to express itself. This was one of Jung's most important insights. The person who believes they are incapable of hatred is often the one most easily consumed by it. The person who insists they could never deceive, manipulate, or seek revenge may simply fail to recognize those tendencies when they arise. The shadow gains its power through denial. Discovering the root of the shadow is therefore not about assigning blame to our parents, our culture, or even our biology. Nor is it about excusing destructive behavior. It is about understanding the forces that have shaped us so that we are no longer governed by them unconsciously. The purpose of shadow work is not to erase our past, reject our humanity, or become someone else. It is to distinguish between what we have inherited, what we have learned, and what we consciously choose to become. By this stage, You have observed the shadow, listened to what it is communicating, and begun to understand where it came from. The next step is to change your relationship with it. For most of our lives, the shadow operates automatically. A situation arises, an emotion appears, and we react before we have even realized what has happened. The unconscious impulse becomes conscious behavior. Shadow work is the practice of interrupting that process. Between the impulse and the reaction, there is a moment of choice. At first, that moment may be almost impossible to notice. But as awareness grows, so does the space between what we experience and how we respond. Within that space, we discover something we did not previously have: freedom. Instead of immediately identifying with the emotion, we learn to observe it. Rather than saying, "I am angry," we begin to recognize anger is arising within me. Instead of, "I am jealous," we notice jealousy is present. This may seem like a subtle difference, but psychologically, it is profound. The emotion is no longer your identity. It is an experience moving through your consciousness. The same is true of the thoughts that accompany it. The shadow often speaks with great certainty. It tells us that we are worthless, that we are superior, that we have been rejected, that we must retaliate, or that we can never change. Left unexamined, these thoughts feel like objective truth. But a thought is not a fact, and an impulse is not a command. The goal is not to suppress these thoughts or pretend they do not exist. It is to recognize them without allowing them to determine who we become. Every time we pause before reacting, we loosen the grip of the unconscious. Every time we choose awareness over impulse, we strengthen the conscious personality. This is where responsibility begins. Not because the shadow disappears, but because we are no longer completely identified with it. Shadow work is therefore not about eliminating darkness. It is about becoming conscious enough that darkness no longer determines our actions without our awareness. The more conscious we become, the greater our freedom becomes, and it is within that freedom that genuine transformation begins. Shadow work does not end with understanding. Insight alone is not transformation. It is possible to recognize our patterns, understand where they came from, and even identify the voice of the shadow, yet continue living exactly as before. Integration begins when awareness becomes action. Every time we pause before reacting, choose honesty over denial, or respond consciously rather than automatically, the relationship between the conscious and unconscious begins to change. The shadow does not disappear. It becomes something we recognize rather than something that unconsciously governs our lives. Shadow work requires patience. Many of the patterns we carry have developed over years, sometimes decades. They will not disappear after a single moment of insight. Psychological growth is gradual. It is measured not by perfection, but by increasing awareness and increasingly conscious choices. It requires humility. The shadow is something we continue to encounter throughout our lives. The moment we become convinced that we are beyond pride, anger, lust, envy, or self-deception, we become vulnerable to them once again. But perhaps most importantly, integration requires faith. For those struggling with addiction or compulsive behavior, the greatest obstacle is often not the behavior itself, but the shame that follows it. The cycle is painfully familiar. We begin to believe that because we continue to fail, we are failures. That because we struggle with lust, anger, addiction, or envy, that is who we truly are. But this is precisely the illusion that shadow work seeks to overcome. The shadow is not your identity. It is a part of your personality that has not yet been fully understood or integrated. There is a profound difference between saying, "I am an angry person," and I am experiencing anger. The first defines your identity. The second describes your experience. Shame says, "This is who I am." Faith says, "This is something I am facing." Shame turns behavior into identity. Faith keeps transformation possible. Progress is rarely linear. There will be setbacks. Old patterns will return. The shadow will sometimes feel stronger than your conscious intentions. But every moment of awareness is evidence that consciousness is growing. Every time you recognize the pattern before acting on it, you have already weakened its unconscious hold. This is why Jung described individuation not as a destination, but as a lifelong process. Life continually reveals new aspects of ourselves through new relationships, new responsibilities, and new challenges. The goal is therefore not to become perfect, nor is it to eliminate every dark impulse from the personality. The goal is to become whole, to recognize the capacity for both light and darkness within yourself, and to accept responsibility for both. Shadow work is the process of becoming the fullest, most honest, and most conscious version of who you already are. Only then will the shadow cease to govern your life from the darkness and become a part of yourself that has been acknowledged, understood, and brought into the light.